Okay, so our esteemed keynote speaker for Saturday night is a renowned American clairvoyant, historian, author, and teacher who has traveled the world in search of answers to the greatest mysteries of our ages. For over 2 decades, she has been a headliner at conferences in both Europe and America as a mystical symbolist and initiate in many ancient paths of wisdom. She has appeared on over 200 radio shows, including Coast to Coast, AM, Dreamland, Gaia TV, and a number of international documentaries. She is the author of 3 acclaimed books, Dialogues with the Angels, The Return of the Divine Sophia, and Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years in the Ancient Mystery Religions. Her latest book, The Angelic Origins of the Soul, Discovering Your Divine Purpose, was due out in fall of 2017. Did that come out yet? Yes? Okay, cool. Excellent. Initiated in many ancient streams of wisdom, her workshops are a powerful synthesis of history and mystical wisdom. She is the founder of the Phoenix Fire Lodge Mystery School in Atlanta. She is a bishop in the Madonna Ministries and the author of over 30 DVDs and 13 online courses. As a healer, hypnotherapist, and clairvoyant, she's given readings to over 6,000 people worldwide. Now that's a data set. In her continuous commitment to inner awakening and world unity. Tonight, she is going to talk to us about who the star nations are, what is the evidence that Earth is being visited by beings from stars today, what evidence do we find in our recorded history that human beings have been having contact with intelligent beings from other stars for perhaps millions of years, where are these beings responsible for seeding our planet, and do they still oversee its development today? Have these extraterrestrials been interacting with us even longer than recorded history? The stunning presentation takes us on a journey into the hidden history of our planet, both ancient and modern, revealing the powerful evidence for the ongoing contact between human beings and other extraterrestrials who have been visiting our planet for millennia. It includes photographs of both ancient and modern alien artifacts and remains, as well as evidence of higher consciousness beings who wish to make contact with us today. Please join me in welcoming Tricia McCannon.
Thank you, Forrest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. It's really so fun to be here. I was a colleague and a friend of Dolores Cannon's and a great admirer of her work and her fabulous daughters that have continued this work with their husbands and their staff. And I know they often don't get an applause, so can we just take a moment to do that? I think that the UFO question is a very big one, and it's one that is really critical for us right now. Many of you may not know my work or may know my work. In fact, let's do a show of hands. How many of you are familiar with me from YouTube or radio or television or conferences? How many of you don't really have a clue who I am? Okay, good. That's fine. Well, that gives us a good starting point, no problem. So what I'm going to do tonight, we have about 203 slides for you, okay? We have a lot of slides, but I'm going to spend about 10 minutes in the beginning talking to you about myself so you have some, idea who I am. I kind of always like that, so I know who's talking to me and why. So I will tell you I'm an author of 4 books, and I'll talk briefly a little bit about my life through them. I've, like a lot of you perhaps, I've had contact with multidimensional beings my whole life. I've seen UFOs in broad daylight, I've seen them at night, I've seen them with other people present, I've seen them alone. Since the time I was a child, I was very active on the inner planes. So, one night I'd be in the temples of golden wisdom studying with masters. The next I'd be in the bowels of the lower astral plane going, where am I? Get me out of here. One night I'd be on spaceships with Pleiadians. A month would pass and I'd be being visited by beings from other members of the Galactic Federation. When I was about 15, I was taken in a ship to a planet much like ours, and I was shown that this planet, that what we were looking at, was actually going through what they call an ascension process. Now, at the age of 15, the conversation, the words ascension, we didn't even use it. And I was explained that this is something that periodically happens in the life cycle of every planet. And that there were people leaving the planet that couldn't handle the increased frequency. There were people coming onto the planet because they wanted to be part of the party. There were spaceships around the planet watching as it moved up into these higher dimensions. And, you know, they said, this is what is going to happen with your Earth in your lifetime. And so I had, when I was about 12, I was taken onto a ship, and I was shown the Earth as a clear crystal, you know, like a globe, and they showed me the inner Earth and the 7 cities that are inside the inner Earth. And my guide, you know, I had a Pleiadian human-looking man, but I also had another guide that had an eagle's head and a human body. And he was really my chief guide. And so you know, always knew, I mean, I prayed to the stars. How many of you prayed to the stars? Because I had a sense that there was a higher intelligence out there, a very conscious, benevolent, loving intelligence. And I kind of sometimes felt like the stork had left me on the wrong doorstep. How many of you felt like that? So my family is very traditional Christian. My dad was a lawyer. So I'm a very anal retentive researcher, as you will discover. And if you ever read my books, they're 1,200 footnotes, 500 footnotes, and 100 pages of back matter. I just can't help myself. So my dad was Baptist, my mom was Methodist, and I grew up in Atlanta, in the Bible Belt, in the Deep South. How many of you can relate to this? Oh, yeah. So my older sister got married to a preacher, and they're like fundamentalists, and I'm sure they're convinced all of us are going to hell. And so growing up for me, my dad had been in the military. He was a lieutenant commander in the Navy. And he wound up having a massive stroke when he was 37, and his whole left side was paralyzed. And you know, he almost died, but he very valiantly pushed through, but he fell into alcoholism. And so, as you can imagine, he was very angry at this set of cards that life had dealt him. And of course, he took it out on all of us. And so all of us had different coping mechanisms. For me, I spent all this time in the forest. There was a great forest across the street from where we lived. And after a while, I began to see these elemental devic energies in the forest. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Have you heard about those? They're like the guardian angels of the plant kingdom. And I think that because most humans can't see them, they went and told the overlighting angel that overlit that forest about me. And he came and began to teach me when I was 8 years old about the great chain of being. The great chain of being is how the light and the sound of God are moved down through the vibrational dimensions to eventually create the third dimension that we live in. And that made perfect sense to me. I was 8 years old. Doesn't that sound good to you? Makes sense to me. And I could tell that he was different from me. He was very benevolent and loving, but he didn't have the same sort of density that we have. He was totally connected in with the universal plan. If he needed to know something, it was direct transmission. He could turn his attention there and know it. If he needed to send information, he could send it telepathically, and I could receive it. Us, you know how we are. We're so conflicted. I mean, should we eat that chocolate or not eat that chocolate? You know, should we take a shower or a bath? You know, should we buy this dress or not buy this dress? What's our budget? We have so much going on in our brains and in our emotions. With our mental body, it's a very refined body, but it weighs, it analyzes, it judges, it criticizes, but it can only hold like 3 or 4 things at once. It's limited. The soul body, which is a higher, subtle energy body, can transmit directly and receive vast amounts of information directly. And this is how it works when you make contact with these higher beings. So this first book that I wrote, what happened is, because of my experiences with UFOs, when I was about 27, what happened is I did a lot of praying growing up that someone wiser than me could give me a roadmap to all these dimensional planes and kind of help me figure out how to use my clairvoyant gifts, because I would look at people and sometimes be flooded with information about them, and then other times I'd try to see stuff and I couldn't see it. And it was kind of like, how does this gift work? Where's the gas pedal and where's the brake and how do I steer it? How many of you have felt like that? So, when I was 19 years old, I was at school at Florida State University, and a group of masters appeared called the Viragi Masters. The word virag is a Sanskrit word meaning detachment. So these are masters that have detached from the physical world, in the sense that they're not trying to get married, have children, make a lot of money, buy a big house, have a nice car, have a big bank account. They don't care. They care about the spiritual world. They care about becoming masters. And so they had a roadmap to all these dimensional planes, and they taught a specific way of accessing them called soul travel. This is the ability that each and every one of us has to access the inner worlds and travel in the heavenly kingdoms while we're still in the physical body. Well, this was my kind of path. I didn't have to believe something and wait and find out when I died. I could find out for myself through my own direct experience. If I wanted to meet a master, presumably, if I could vibrate high enough in my frequencies, I could go and meet those masters and learn from them. Doesn't that make sense to you guys? So I've always kind of been like a show me kind of girl. I want to see the evidence. And so I began to study with these masters, and it took me probably a year and a half before I ever, saw the inner light and opening up the third eye. When you first start seeing it, it's kind of like a little violet or purple or blue blip in the periphery of your vision. Those are masters. The white and the yellow are more spirit guides. How many of you have seen those kinds of things in your life out of the corner of your eye? Well, after a while, you can begin to develop it where you can see straight on, and you can hold it, and then you can navigate into these higher dimensional realms. So this is not unique to me. I've spent a lifetime developing it, and probably many lifetimes. But each and every one of you has the ability to be able to learn to do this if you choose. It's up to you. So my very first, what happened is these masters were taking me to these movies on the inner planes, and I was watching movies in my dream state, and I would come back and go, that was a great movie. And then I was like, oh, that wasn't written. I could bring it down to earth. So one of them was about the UFO phenomena. Well, I had never read a book on it. This was my mid-20s, so I decided to go to a MUFON conference. And I sat and listened for 3 days to archaeologists, anthropologists, theosophists, theologists, engineers, ex-military people talk about the UFO phenomena. And the weird thing was, I knew what they were saying, and I seemed like I knew a lot more than what they were saying. And I was like, how is that even possible that I could know more than, what they're saying? I didn't know as much about the Greys, but I knew a lot more about the Pleiadians and the Syrians and the Galactic Federation than they seemed to know. So I thought, well, maybe I've been having real physical contact, but really I was a scaredy cat, and I was scared to find out. So I just told myself I must be really active on the inner planes. So I set up an organization in Atlanta, and for 8 years, it was called the UFO Forum. I brought in different speakers to Atlanta, and we had between 100 and 300 people that came every single month to find out about this phenomena. And after enough years had passed, my guides said, it's time for you to find out about your own experiences. And I finally began to do that. And truth to be told, it took me about 1.5 years between every regression to process and integrate it because it was so deep. And so then my guy said, it's time for you to begin to speak. And I was like, not in this city. I'm a commercial advertising photographer. I shot for Coke, Macy's, IBM. It was like, not in this city. They're like, fine, go to California. They can handle this in California. So I did, and suddenly I was invited onto the speaking circuit in about 10 cities in the U.S., and then I started being invited to Europe and so forth. So when I went to write a book, I thought I was going to be writing it about the Galactic Federation and the history of the planet and so forth, but my guys were like, no, we want you to write another book. So this is the very first book, and this is a book about miracles, masters, divas, multidimensional realities, and it begins when that angel begins to teach me in the forest. I then thought I was going to get to write my book about the UFOs and the ETs. But clearly the masters had another plan altogether. So I had written this book, amazing book about the great spiritual mysteries, because I was trained in the Egyptian mysteries, the Celtic, the Native American, and of course I've been studying with the Viragi masters since I was 19, which were the masters of the Far East. And so I included 3 little chapters on Jesus because I happen to love Jesus, and I happen to think his message was essentially important. You know, love your neighbor as yourself. Forgiveness is the key. The kingdom of heaven is within. You know, I mean, he really summed it all up into very simple but profound terms, and he was a master initiate. So before I knew it, I had 200 pages on Jesus inside of what was now this giant 600-page books, which, you know, the publishers don't like 600-page books. So I thought, Mamma mia, they're having babies. What can I do? So I decided what I would do is just pull out the section on Jesus. That was going to solve my problem. So I was laying on the floor of my office in Atlanta, and I had my hand over my eyes, and it was that week after Christmas that's, you know, very still and very quiet. And it's a great week for writers where you can really go in. And I was thinking, that's how I'm going to solve this problem. And I became aware of this brilliant light shining down on me. And I moved my arm, and Jesus was standing in the room about where you are now, about 20 feet from me, well, 15 feet from me. And he was totally in gold in his light body. And without any preamble, he said, I want you to write a book about my lost years and secret teachings. There has been enough war and bloodshed in my name. And I'll just tell you, it was like an arrow just pierced my heart. And when I could even collect my thoughts, I said, well, could I finish this other book first because I'm running out of money? We're so human, aren't we? And he smiled and he waved his hand. He said, don't worry, it'll just take a moment and I'll open every door. And, you know, I lay there and I thought to myself, you know, in these 6,000 readings where I've looked at people's soul histories, I have seen again and again something I would call the karmic, dharmic arc. In other words, each one of us comes into situations of travail and suffering, whether it's your family of origin or a tragedy that befalls from the outside. We all have our crosses to bear. But rather than running from those, they become the catalyst event for us to find what our true purpose is here in this life. So the boy that loses his father, for example, becomes a big brother for hundreds of other boys. The girl that watches her mother die of cancer becomes a doctor or a nurse or a homeopath or a naturopath. So from the ashes of our travail really comes the motivation for us to find our purpose. So I thought to myself, well, gosh, I was born in this fundamentalist Christian family. My sister's been, in the name of Jesus, has created so much pain in our family. You know, maybe this is the karma meets the dharma. So I thought to myself, well, if Jesus, he certainly knew. I mean, he could have stayed in any of those countries where he studied, where he was really adored. But instead, he came back to do his mission. And if he can do that mission, I can write a darn book. So I said, okay. So I put together a group of, because I'm a visual teacher and a visual learner, a series of very powerful PowerPoint presentations on the Egyptian mysteries, the Jewish mysteries, and the real inner, beautiful, esoteric wisdom teachings of the Christ, and I began to write the book. And the result was this book, which takes him through those 30 lost years and is really a tour de force of the great spiritual mysteries that surrounded him. South of him was Egypt. Slightly to the east of him was the Greek mysteries. The Druids were all through Europe. They had 60 universities and 60,000 students. The Persian Magi mysteries. And then, of course, you had the Buddhist mysteries. And so this book is a tour de force of those mysteries, and it's profoundly honoring to him. This book, I had about 200 pages of his secret teachings because I got access to the Vatican during the writing of this book. There were a lot of miracles that happened. People who appeared at my door with secret writings, books that materialized on my bookshelf during the course of the writing of the Jesus book. And, this book is really about the discovery of a period of time in human history when God, the Creator, was considered to be the divine female. Because everybody could observe that who gives birth in every species around the world is the female. So who would have birthed the universe? It's kind of logical. How can a man give birth? Men may contribute, but the birthing is the female. In those cultures which lasted for tens of thousands of years, men and women ruled together in a partnership model, and there was no war on this planet. Now, we've been in war for 4,000 years. All we know is war. We have lived in society shaped by the negative patriarchy, not the positive masculine. The positive masculine is superbly beautiful, as we all know. And I think all of us women would agree that it would be a lonely world without our beautiful men. But the negative patriarchy has hurt men and women alike. So this book is a tour de force of the discovery of that secret history with the archaeology and the anthropology and what Jesus also had to say, because what he called God was the Abba, Amma, the Father, Mother God. And he talked openly about the fact that periodically the divine daughter and son both come to this planet to help us, as he says, even as I and Mary Magdalene have come to earth. We all know what happened to poor little Mary Magdalene in Pope Gregory I 33 homily in 591 AD. He said, "My brothers, how did she get that expensive spikenard? Clearly, she must have gotten it from perfuming her body with, from forbidden acts of the flesh." And thus began the lie, which now in Catholicism in 1979, the Catholic Church said, "Oops, we were sorry, she wasn't a prostitute. We were just kidding." 1,500 years later, it basically effectively made women slaves. We only got the right to vote in this country in 1922. So this is a book, again, about readjusting and discovering hidden truths that can shift our society now and bring us into a more balanced state of consciousness. This last book, I was like, do I get to write the E.T. book now? They're like, no, you have another book. I'm like, oh my God, when will I ever get to write the E.T. book? So that is going to be the next one, I promise you guys. It's about the Galactic Federation. This one really is about what I've discovered over 6,000 readings about the very nature of who we are. And I will tell you that you are far more divine than you can possibly imagine. That the ancient teachings knew that there is a spark of God within every single one of us, and that the universe is alive with consciousness. And that's how we can wake up. And that's also how our star brothers and sisters can wake up. And some of them are a lot more awake than we are, and some of them are, still stuck in their lower chakras with, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and, violence. So really and truly, we have a whole hierarchy of higher consciousness beings that are more advanced than us. And then we have some down in the trash can that are trying to pull us down. And we're at a place as a planet where we have to make a decision which way we want to go. And each one of us has to make this decision for ourselves. Do we follow the path of love and unity, or do we follow the path of fear, hate, violence, and division? And it's the same place we've come to on this planet in many earlier stages. When I spoke as a keynote at the Transformation Conference last year, I spoke on Atlantis and the evidence for these incredible pyramids and underground cities that look like New York City underneath the water that we have now found. I also spoke about Antarctica and how there is a hidden city in Antarctica. It's about 50 miles wide. It goes down between 1.5 miles and 3 miles under the ice. And they have these large giants with the big cranium heads and also humans. That area was habitable until about 12,000 years ago, when the asteroid took down Atlantis and broke the mid-Atlantic ridge, and it created a huge pole shift. And that's why that's under the ice, and that's why there's 7 governments down there racing to try to get the technology, and of course, America wants to be the one. This is why Buzz Aldrin and many of the astronauts have been there. This is why cardinals have gone there and come back and met with the Pope at the Vatican. Believe me, this is part of that secret history that we're in the process of trying to reveal. I have many DVDs, probably about 30. I only brought 10 with me. I only have a few left, and I'm almost sold out. I think I've sold out of one of my books, and I've got 3 copies of each of my other 3 books. That's all I have here now. I also have a mystery school. I taught this in person for many years, about 12 years, and people kept saying, do you have this online? Because I live in, Timbuktu. And I'm like, no. But I finally have gotten these 12 up online. And, if you're interested in it, you can actually go to my website, Tricia McCannon Speaks, and go under mysteries, go under online classes, and read about each one. I give you the table of contents and a whole big excerpt. And so if you're interested in kind of deepening that, you're very welcome to. Okay, that's enough about me. Does that sound good? So you guys have a clue who I am? So today we're going to take a journey into ancient and modern visitations of the star people. So certainly the extraterrestrial visitors have been coming to our planet for tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. And of course, we've seen some proof of their visitation in the archaeological remains around the world. These star beings can be seen in the stories of angels, which perhaps really were, the messengers of the gods or the Anunnaki, but that's not to say that what we think of as angels, which are higher dimensional spirit guides, do not exist. They do. I'll just tell you, as a seer, they do. But it's very challenging with the nomenclature as to whether we're talking about a higher fifth dimensional, multi-dimensional being, or are we talking about a physical being that's actually got some physical wings. And I personally think both are true. So we're going to take a look at some very interesting things. Some of these you may have seen, some of these you may not have seen. This is from 10,000 BC in Italy, and you can see what looks like, astronaut helmets with light coming off of them. Here we have 6,000 BC in the Sahara Desert in North Africa. Once again, we have the same kind of thing with some kind of like deep sea diver or helmet and little UFOs up in the sky and these rock paintings. And here we have what they kind of look like ghosts with big old eyes, don't they? But really, it's the same kind of thing. Either they've got glowing heads or they've got some kind of helmet on that seems to glow, and clearly their eyes appear pretty dark and pretty large, and this is from 5,000 BC from Kimberley, Australia. They're cave paintings that are found all over the world that are very similar. And of course, we'd like more detail, but this is from the Tassili Mountains in Algeria. Similar figures have been found in the Safar Tassili with the Cambro caves in France and several other places. Some raise their hands towards a giant being or of non-human appearance. Sometimes these round heads seem to even hover in the air. When we go back to 29,000 years, literally in Tanzania, we find all sorts of rock depictions of what appear to be either flying hats or flying UFOs, okay? What could it be? It looks like someone's hat. But here is very clearly, we've got the rows of lights beneath the UFO, and we have what look like almost like cylinder beams, or perhaps these were meant to be lights coming down, and there seems to even to be movement with this one. Now, when we look at Egypt, which is a culture that we still have some of the remains from, unlike most of Atlantis, we see all sorts of things. This is called a pyramidion, and it was put at the top of these great obelisks. And the obelisk acted as acupuncture needles to harness the energies of the ley lines or the grids to run or conduct electromagnetic energy. And of course, it was taken from what we now think of as a space capsule. In fact, the original space capsule that came down here was kept in the Temple of Heliopolis, which was the major of 3 major centers in Egypt. Heliopolis is what the Greeks called it, the Temple of the Sun. I mean, its walls were 44 feet thick, okay? The Egyptians called it the city of On, O-N, or Anu. And it was said that only the high priest were ever allowed to go into the actual real bin, okay? Because, of course, there was all sorts of equipment, technological equipment inside of it. These ancient astronauts appear all over the world. Here, of course, are gold planes from Bogota, Colombia, that, you know, archaeologists would like to say are birds, but clearly they're really not birds. Here we have from the Mayan civilization what looks like a respirator with lights literally around the headgear. And back here are some kind of tubes that are connected with a bodysuit, okay? Here we have a little capsule with flames shooting out the bottom, and the little dude is in some kind of like a little compression, you know, rubber suit, much like we use with astronauts today, and here's the tip of the capsule. So these kinds of things have been found all over the world in many, many locations. In the Temple of Abydos in Egypt, and I've been to Egypt and taken groups there, in the higher registers, the way that it works is the higher registers always represent the gods. As you go down to the bottom, it's kind of like higher dimensional beings. So we can see here, this was discovered in 1948, very clearly a helicopter, a submarine, some kind of an airplane, a Luke Skywalker glider. And of course, we know this has to do with the gods because this is the symbol for the gods. The symbol is the bee. Why? Because in the ancient world, there were only 2 preservatives, salt and honey. So these were the preservers of the nectar of wisdom for future generations. The Egyptian pharaoh was called the beekeeper. The head of the Saramon society was called the beekeeper. Jesus studied in Egypt. He became a high initiate in that path, as well as many, many others. And he, of course, fathered the Merovingian lineage. When they opened the Merovingian tombs, they found 300 solid gold bees, okay? Marking, and of course, what happened when the church took over is they put the bee on their papal crest. And the Pope has a beehive hat, you know, and the Dome of the Rock is the ultimate beehive. So they took on the hermetic symbols of these ancient mystery schools, saying, don't pay any attention to them, pay attention to us. We've got the juice now. We're the main, you know, source of wisdom. So this is, of course, from the Temple of Denderah, which was Hathor's temple. It's equivalent really to the throat chakra in the way that the chakras lay up and down of the body, lay up and down the temples of the Nile. And of course, it looks like a giant electric light bulb with even a cord coming out, okay, a generator. And it's, by the way, I've been down to this temple. There's no windows or anything. It's in a lower level where there's absolutely no light. So how would they even have carved this without torches? And guess what? There's no soot. There's no evidence of fire or torches ever being used in this chamber. So they obviously had some kind of artificial light in order to be able to do this work. Now, these are very interesting. These are kind of recent discoveries. These are geoglyphs found in Jordan, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Thousands of ancient carvings similar to the Nazca lines have been discovered in the Middle East. The geoglyphs are visible from the sky, but not from the ground. This odd feature is one of the main reasons some researchers believe the structures were made for ancient aliens as markers to land. Now, I want you to kind of really memorize this in your head, this strange kind of shape, because I'm going to show you a picture of a ship in about 20 slides that the base of the spaceship looks very much like this, almost as if maybe these were landing places for the ships and they somehow burned these images into the rock. New satellite mapping technologies in Jordan have allowed researchers to discover more of them than ever before. Archaeologists are referring to the carvings as wheels, but the stone structures have a wide variety of designs, with a common one being a circle with spokes radiating outward. Researchers conservatively believe they date back at least 2,000 years to the time, yes, when, the Old Testament and the New Testament kind of join up. I mean, the Old Testament was only codified, you may not know this, in 100 BC. Over 60% of the Old Testament was written around 100, 200, 300, or 400 BC. I thought it was thousands of years old. But actually, they didn't even have the story of the Great Flood until they were in captivity with the Babylonians for 50 years, and they read the Atrahasis and the Enumad Elish, which were Babylonian scripts, and they didn't have the story of the Garden of Eden, which, by the way, said that men and women were created together. It wasn't man, and then women got to be part of the rib, so she had to be subservient for the rest of her existence. No. They were created together as partners, as they were meant to be, as equals. So in Jordan alone, this writer writes, we've got stone-built structures that are far more numerous than the Nazca lines, far more extensive in the area that they cover, and far older, said David Kennedy, professor of classics and ancient history at the University of Western Australia, to Live Science, and this was published in the Journal for Archaeological Science. And so there are traditional archaeologists that are observing and finding these things and going, I don't know what they mean, but something's up here. So let's look at some other strange, anomalous archaeological finds that don't fit in with the traditional version of history that we've all been taught. This one, for example, is a coin that was found in Illinois, in Longridge, Illinois, at a depth of 114 feet. Now, according to information supplied by the Illinois State Geological Survey, the deposits containing the coin are between 200 and 400,000 years old. So let's take a look at the archaeological timeline. I've looked at this a lot. According to current versions of anthropology, Homo sapiens were created around 210,000 years ago. That's what they believe. Although some people are now starting to push it back to the 300s. Homo sapiens sapien, which is our version of reality, we were created according to traditional anthropology 40,000 years ago. So what the heck is a coin, doing if we were swinging out of the jungles as Neanderthal or Cro-Magnon? And what do we see? We see what appears to be a giant guy with a club beating a little dude here, okay? And then some kind of strange runic writings around here. So, where did it come from? Clearly, somebody big was visiting the planet, beating up on somebody small. Here we have a shoe-like footprint, looks like a Buster Brown, discovered by William Meister in Cambrian Shale near Antelope Springs, Utah. If genuine, the shoe print would be over 505 million years old. So here you see it without being outlined. You can see it very clearly if you look. Here they bothered to outline it in white just to make the point. So 505 million years old. Who was down here with a Buster Brown shoe? Or an astronaut shoe, as the case may be, 505 million years ago. Then we have strange things like this. This is a guy riding a Triceratops who, was an agrarian animal. Now, the dinosaurs were supposed to have gone extinct 65 million years ago when that meteor hit the Yucatan, which we all take for granted now, but believe me, that theory was not accepted by mainstream science till the 1980s, that recently. Okay, so we are literally uncovering history year after year, decade after decade, and groups like this are part of what's pushing the envelope to find out true world history. This one's really interesting. This is 300 million year old machine part found. It was discovered in Russia. This aluminum object is called a tooth wheel. It was embedded in a piece of coal. What kind of machine was it a part of? Who made it? Where did it come from? Humans didn't learn how to make aluminum pure until 1825. So either somebody was landed down here and a little part of their ship or something broke off and it got left, oops. Or there might have been earlier civilizations here that we talk about Atlantis and Lemuria. Who knows what was before that? It really could have gone a whole lot further back. This is a 400-million-year-old machine part found in the remote Kamchatka area of Russia. Russia sounds like it was a busy place. 150 miles from Tagil, discovered by campers. Archaeologists at the University of St. Petersburg have confirmed its authenticity, according to archaeologist Yuri Golubev, the fine shock scientist, because it is clearly a machine and you see these kinds of parts. And this is 400 million years ago. So somebody at least was visiting the planet that had very complex machinery a very long time ago. And this is kind of that area, just so you have it, of Russia. And it's about 150 miles from Tagil is really where it was found. This one's really interesting. I love this one. It's 2.8 billion years old. And it's a series of metallic spheres that were found in South Africa. And they have these machined parallel grooves around the circumference of them that, we couldn't hand make today. And it was found in Precambrian mineral deposits said to be 2.8 billion years old. So maybe we were visited and the ETs threw their garbage out. I mean, maybe that's what happened. Here in America, we have all sorts of strange things you may or may not know about. I'm just going to show you a couple, but I know of about a whole bunch more. This is Hebrew and Sumerian writing that are found in southwestern petroglyphs. What the heck? How'd that happen? And this is at Escalade Canyon. And here we see what appear to be like what they call the ant people. Looks like little mummy bodies, okay, with like some kind of antlers. Now, do they really have antennae like insectoids, or is this like some kind of communication device that has antennas going off the top of the head? We don't know. This is like a big puzzle. We've got certain pieces, and we're all doing our best to put the pieces together and figure out what the picture really looks like. Look at this one. These are found in caves in several places, Illinois, Ohio. There's about 4 or 5 states that actually have this. This was found in 1931, and they are coins that have Egyptian symbols on them. This is the ibis bird, which was, of course, Thoth, the god of wisdom. This is the gate of initiation. If you know hieroglyphs and hermetics, it really helps. And I know a lot of hermetics. This is the symbol for eternal life, the Ankh. I don't really know what these symbols mean. Okay, but this is extremely interesting that this should show up in North America. And many years ago, my friend Robert Goswolf, who has passed over by now, but he was a wonderful speaker in his own right, and he showed me artifacts. He was in my house staying from another cave like this that were all Egyptian. Now, I don't have it in this presentation, but in one of my many presentations, I have this secret cave that was found in the Grand Canyon in 1908. Many of you guys know about that one? It was amazing. Gigantic Buddha, 5 stories high, as tall as this ceiling, if not taller, probably twice the size of it. Granary bins that are Tibetan and circular in nature. Mummies of giant bodies. Statues of a Buddha character with little demons on one side and little angels on the other, which kind of sums it up, isn't it? We're in this constant struggle, and what will we choose for our own nature and spiritual development? Now, of course, we have stories in the Old Testament which have been, religion-fied, so to speak. But, I think that these men and women were doing the very best they could without a knowledge of technology to describe what they were seeing. Wheels within wheels, people have tried to figure out, how does it look? Maybe it was one of those UFOs that literally has whirling wheels or moving parts. Moses' encounter with Mount Sinai, it came with the roaring of engines and fumes and flames on the mountaintop. What they were following, those poor Hebrews around the countryside for 40 years, if we believe that, literally, which it could have been 40 years, was a pillar of fire by night that stood stationary in the sky from a UFO, and a pillar of light during the day. And he would kind of run them around the desert. I mean, the poor things only got to eat meat 3 times in 40 years. And one of those times, there were pigeons that were driven by the exhaust of that, and they were irradiated, so the people got really sick. So, I mean, if you really look at this stuff, it's pretty interesting. In fact, Dolores published a book. It's a strange title, but it's really a great book. It's by a biblical scholar called Is Jehovah an E.T.? And, you know, it's actually a very well-written book, and you might be able to find it in the bookstore downstairs. But it's some very interesting look at how many times whoever this particular God with a little g, in my opinion, was saying, by the way, this is how I want you to prepare the food. 1,200, mutton chops, okay? 1,500 cattle. I got to feed a whole crew up here on this ship. So we need some major meat from your flocks, okay? I mean, it's a very well-researched book by a biblical scholar. So all I'm saying is it's worth a look to consider that some of these early religions, like, the Abrahamic religions, were really based on the encounters with gods with a little g that had their own agenda. I mean, anyone that tells you to go kill every man, woman, chicken, pig, and goat in the Canaan country and steal all their land and rape all their virgins and take them back is not God with a big G. And that's basically what the poor Hebrews had to do. And they were also told that if they didn't do what that God said, he would curse them and their families down to the last generation. So, I mean, that's a pretty heavy-handed threat that even if you didn't want to do it, you probably would do it, because what else could you do with that kind of power and technology? So the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And then, of course, you have, Aaron's sons literally being burned by some kind of radiation because they got too close. Only the priest of Aaron, they had to wear these special suits because of the radiation problem. They were using nuclear power. There is no doubt about it. They understood nuclear and atomic power. And so some of these devices, these rods of power that the gods gave their kings of the city-states during that, 4400 to probably 0 AD, when they were so active fighting each other during the age of Aries, that was about 4400 to 2200 BC, really did have significant power. Now, when we get into more recent times, the 1700s, this is a very interesting painting of the baptism of Christ showing a UFO. Okay, that's just pretty darn interesting. I personally think that we were in such trouble that the higher dimensional beings said, how can we help this poor planet that's been enslaved by competing wars and competing agendas, some of which were benevolent beings and some of which were not benevolent beings. And I think that, we had someone like Jesus who volunteered to come down and say, let me just say, there's one creator behind it all. Let's make it simple for us so that we can free ourselves from the bondage of fear, blame, shame, guilt, and coercion. Here we have Mary in the Annunciation. Here's Mary on bended knee, and you can see there's a UFO literally sending a beam of light into her crown chakra. And the angel's talking with the Pope over here with his little beehive hat. And here's a close-up, literally, of the ship. This is in the National Gallery in London. Here we have another close-up of it just so that you can sort of see it. Here we have Mary and Jesus and John the Baptist, but look what's in the background. We have a UFO, and you can see it really clearly here. There's a man with his hand up looking at the UFO in the sky, like, what the heck, And here's Mary, okay? So this knowledge had to have been passed in the underground stream from the mystery schools because the church moved to suppress this. So the great initiates, you can tell they would encode things in certain paintings. Here, this is from Yugoslavia. It's the gigantic altarpiece behind it. Here's Jesus on the cross, and we've got a little war going on between, two guys that are chasing each other in little flying speeders. Okay, this one's looking over his shoulder, and this one's, hot on his heels, in the middle of a religious scene. Here we have a tapestry called Summer's Triumph, 1538. And if we look, we see all this normal stuff, but then up in the sky, we either see flying top hats or we see what appear to be UFOs. Here's a tapestry of the life of Mary from the 1400s, and here, once again, very subtly placed in the background, is a UFO. This is in the Basilica of Notre Dame. And here we have from Burgundy, France, in the 1400s, again, another tapestry with a UFO. I love this one. It's called The Miracle of the Snow. And here we have Jesus and Mary literally on a spaceship that's been masked by clouds, as we know UFOs are likened to do. And here's the town going, yep, they're up there, and here's the Pope with his little beehive hat. And this is from 1383 to 1440. This one's very interesting. The artist very cleverly masked the idea of multidimensional realities. God's up here with Mary, okay? And it's really like a spaceship, isn't it? So interesting. Here we have one where Jesus, the Father and the Son, we forget that the dove is supposed to be the Divine Mother. We've called it the Holy Ghost now. It's not even the Holy Spirit half the time. They don't tell us it's the Divine Mother, but it is the Divine Feminine. But look, they've got Earth with what appear to be two antennas and what appears to be a spaceship. This is not circular, this is angular up here in the top. So this knowledge had to be encoded in art because it had been suppressed. When we go back to 842 AD, there was a sighting of all sorts of aerial ships. We are used to aerial ships. We grew up in an age of airplanes and rocket ships and blimps and weather balloons. This is some kind of big ship and some kind of weird thing going on in the sky. Here, this is a 12th century manuscript where there was a battle going on between the French and I think it was the English in the medieval times. And basically, the English Crusaders had surrounded the French completely, and it looked like the French were going to lose. But suddenly, these blazing shields came down from the sky, UFOs, and scared the bejesus out of the poor, English that were like, head for the hills. They got reinforcements here. So the Saxons fled in terror. So here we have a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, who does seem to have been a weird guy. He had a lot of visions of very strange, dark things in the lower astral plane. It's hard to know whether or not he's painting some kind of flying craft here or what, or if this is just, another one of his strange visions. But this is from 1505. This is from the Battle of Nuremberg, Germany, where there was a gigantic battle in April of 1561. And look at the size of the town and the size of this mothership. That is just gigantic. Unbelievable. And there's some kind of something that's fallen and, created fire over here. But these are these long cylindrical ones, and with lights on them. And then also the globes that we hear so much about. And this was a very big deal. This is in the Zurich Central Library. The battle began at dawn, they say, and it lasted 1 hour. This is a woodcut, Nuremberg, from this whole area. Now, I think this is very interesting. Either this is the largest flying mushroom we've ever seen, okay, or it appears to be some kind of a ship. And it's, of course, a coin. What would it take for us to get a coin made today? Do you think we could get a coin made? It has to be like a president, an inauguration of a queen. It has to be something of great significance to make a coin. This was obviously of great significance. Here we have a little pastoral scene. We have a little dude standing here. Here's some puffy clouds, and here's what appears to be a spaceship with something, either it's exhaust or a ray, or I don't know what it is, coming down from it. And here, of course, we have some war going on. You see the spears happening here, and what shows up is some kind of spaceship. And it's hard to make out what this is. I honestly, I can't make out a human. If any of you can make this out, great. But something's up there. So this must have been a very important event. This was in Rome, 1556 and 1547 are some of the French coins, and then the similar Roman ones are from 197 AD. Now, this is recently discovered artifacts. How many of you know about this? This is really interesting. These were discovered about 80 years ago, and the Mexican government covered them up, much as, the U.S. government has covered things up. And it was inside of a pyramid. It's called a cackle mule. And there was a pyramid inside of a pyramid here, okay? This is what the pyramid looked like. When they went inside, they found all of these strange stone glyphs. So let's take a look at analyzing this. Here's the planet Earth, okay? Some little capsule, Ben stone, has come into our planet. Inside the stone, this is like a little bubble saying, inside the stone is this little astronaut guy, okay? And then I don't know what this is. If this is another ship, if there was a collision, we don't know what happened. But we can see pictures of these little guys with big slanty eyes. They look kind of cute, but strange, So they were released finally in 2012. And let's look at some of the meaning behind them. This is my favorite. Here is a UFO, a tractor beam, and what do we find? A being with angel wings. Very interesting. So this appears to have been a winged one that came down. So they obviously had visitations from more than one. This is a round-eyed dude. This is an almond-eyed guy. Here's our little friendly astronaut. Here's Mr. Conehead over here. Okay, and then this one is very, Aztec looking or something very square with some kind of a headdress. So these people were being visited by obviously a number of beings. And of course, when we look in the Incan and Aztec lands, we find things like this, which clearly looks like some kind of a respirator with a light, with a headdress, with, probably cords or tubes here. And they probably didn't know what went here, and they probably decorated it, okay? But they did the best they could to portray basically some kind of ancient astronaut. Now, the Mayans believe that they actually originated from the Pleiades. The Pleiades is a nebula that's in the constellation of Taurus, 400 light years away. It's basically about 2,600 stars. There are 6 we can see with the naked eye, but throughout all time, they've been known as the 7 sisters. Okay, the 7 muses, the 7 nymphs of spring, the 7 singers. There's different cultures that talk about the Pleiades. And in fact, even to this day, the Mayans know that the Pleiades reaches its highest culmination on November the 17th at the top of the sky. And it's connected with the prophecies of the coming of the star nations at the end of this era. The Hopi, I just finished doing an incredible presentation on Mayan cosmogenesis, and I just did another one on the Hopi prophecy and Nostradamus. The Hopi predict 9 signs, and 8 of them have come true. We're waiting for the 9th to happen, which will actually be the falling of some kind of space station. And of course, we've just heard that China had a space station fall. But, I don't know if that's it. If we're done. We're now in the 9th prophecy, or if there's another one that's going to fall. But their prophecies foretold the coming of the white people. They foretold the snakes of iron that crisscrossed this land, which were the railroad tracks, the spider webs, which of course are the electrical wires and the telephone wires. They foretold the coming of the longhorn steer, different but similar from the buffalo. They foretold the coming of the hippies in the 60s and the 70s. 70s, people that would grow their hair and study shamanic ceremonies. And we still have hippies today. How many of you were a hippie in the 60s or 70s? Be proud. Raise your hand. All right. Good to see it. Well, you're part of that prophecy because you're coming, and those eras of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s shifted the consciousness of the world. So we've discovered that in many of their cities, their alignments were to the Pleiades, and they would even have 7 temples aligned like the Pleiades. And this is part of a bigger conversation. I've done presentations on a worldwide pyramid culture. We've discovered over 752,000 pyramids, I'm not kidding, all over the world. Astonishing. So clearly there was an ancient culture that knew how to use these at the time of Atlantis and maybe even earlier ages. So clearly extraterrestrials and UFOs have been with us a long time. This is the one I wanted to show you that I ask you to take a look at the bottom. The glyph in the Syrian and Jordan geoglyphs. Do you see how similar the shape underneath this ship is? This is a painting from the 1700s. They didn't have UFOs that we knew of or flying machines back then. Amazing, a clipper ship with a clear UFO. So was that fun? So let's take a look at some modern ones, okay? So, how many of you would really like to have something like this happen so your neighbors and your families don't think you're strange? Oh yeah, the neighbors down the street, they believe in UFOs, right? If this happened, we'd all go, they were the ones that knew ahead of time. They were the smart ones, okay? So I just had to put this in. I think it would be a lot easier if we had, like worldwide proof and everybody knew and they were all on it. Or if it was on the nightly news. Another ship was seen today in Washington. Yes, it asked for permission to land in the park. It's handing out free candy and consciousness to all comers. That would be great. But unfortunately, many times these UFOs are less obvious, and they certainly have cloaking devices. We can see here, we can't even see the ship, but we can see that clearly some light is coming down from some source up here, although the ship is invisible. Here we have all sorts of anomalous things where these globes of light seem to be separate. They seem to move together, and then they separate and go in different places, and then they come together and become a big ship. So they act in ways we really can't figure out because they defy our current understanding of science. Often the UFOs hide in lenticular clouds. How many of you have seen lenticular clouds? How many of you have seen UFOs? Raise your hand if you see. Oh, yes, I love this. This is great. Lots of people in this audience. I'm not surprised at all. Mount Shasta. Have any of you been to Mount Shasta? They have gorgeous lenticular clouds, and there actually are UFOs that show up there, and this is kind of what they look like. Imagine if this is really a ship, and it kind of looks like one because it's, it's not like a soft, puffy cloud like this. This is clearly, to me, something with a base, a shape, an edge, a clean edge, and a kind of a domed top. So they certainly have the ability to just cloak themselves in clouds. So it's good to pay attention. Now, I wanted to put this in. This is not a real photograph. This is a Photoshop thing. But this is a real photograph. And you can see the definition of the ship here is pretty darn clear. I've never seen a cloud like that. You have? Was it a real cloud? It was? Well, very, very, very interesting. So let me just say there are many things that can be mistaken for spaceships. So just, to kind of give us a grounding. Some people think fireballs and comets are them, or weather satellites or weather balloons. Certainly sometimes people mistake airplanes for them. Meteors, lens flare, space dust, a mistaken planet, an active hoax by somebody, a comet, and an overactive imagination. However, saying that, there are many, many millions of sightings around the world over the last, 70 or 80 years that we've been tracking this. And there are many different kinds of craft. These are just some of the kinds of craft, from circular and disc shaped to pyramidal to long and cylindrical. And I'm going to be showing you some of those next. Now, this is just a classic disc shape. This is a shot of a real one from Australia. Not very exciting. Oh, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, seen it. But then we have bigger pictures like this that are very exciting. This one was a V-shaped one shot in 1997 over Arizona. Quite exciting. Most of us don't know about this incident. This was a huge ship that crashed off the coast of Sag Harbor in Nova Scotia in 1967. And you can see how long the peninsula is and how long the ship appears to be. Quite incredible. The famous Phoenix Lights, most of you I'm sure are familiar with that, from the spring sighting of 1997, where there were dozens of people who shot video of this, and it hovered for hours over the city. Most of us don't know that Hitler did actually have a downed craft. You know, occasionally we read these crazy stories in the National Enquirer or whatever, and we think, oh, I'm not sure I believe any of that. And of course, there is a lot of false, fake news in the National Enquirer that's, you know, very damning. But there actually have been some things that are true. And Hitler did have a downed ship. He was back engineering the technology. This is one of the reasons why the Allies were so fierce to do the Normandy landing, because they knew that he had access to this, and if he managed to perfect it, we would have lost the war. And this is why we were willing to do the Normandy landing, where so many brave men gave their lives for us. This is Nazi Germany, a photograph from 1944. And they were working to go to the moon. They had already set up a base in Antarctica called New Berlin. They had gone down there in 1938 with 33 scientists and members of the Vril Society, and they had discovered these caves that had UFOs in them. They brought some of the UFOs back to Germany, and they were working day and night to back engineer the technology. Of course, and I, you know, because I did this whole presentation on Antarctica, after the war, we knew that there were about 100 submarines missing. There were at least 100 German scientists missing. You know, we got some scientists, Russia got some, but when we got together, the scientists that were there were like, well, where is the smartest ones, you know? And they had vanished. They had gone down to New Berlin. And Hitler had escaped also, although we were told that Hitler was, you know, dead, because, you know, who wouldn't want to hear that after 6 years of, you know, worldwide destruction. So you know, the United States sent a team down with Operation High Jump, run by Admiral Richard Byrd, who was a 33-degree Mason. And he had actually been to the Arctic successfully. He had already flown over Antarctica once, so he was chosen for the job. And he seems to have been a man of great integrity. He took 4,700 troops down there, and the short version is they kicked his ass. You know, the Nazis had already taken some control down there, and it did not go well. They actually were cutting some of his ships with laser beams in half. It was very dangerous. But he was, before he left, before this happened, he was on a reconnaissance mission, and he became flanked by 2 UFOs, and he was taken actually down into the inner Earth. And it was very warm there. The trees were 2 or 3 times the size and the girth they are here. His co-pilot was left in the ship, but he was taken to meet a spiritual master, basically, who basically said to him, look, we of the inner earth have been here for thousands of years, living peacefully. There's 7 races down here, including giants. We all live together beautifully. And we've let you, on the surface, dwellers, have your little petty wars. But you have now crossed the line because you've gotten into atomic bombs and nuclear, and that can destroy the planet, and that's not to be permitted. And you're going to be released to go back and tell your leaders this, because this has got to stop. And so he did go back and tell his leaders, and of course, did it do any good? No. They had a ticker tape parade for him and everything. And he started to tell his story, and he was silenced. And they didn't kill him, but they silenced him. And he kept a secret journal about everything that had happened to him. Well, I will tell you, in the process of putting together the slideshow, I did this at the Transformation Conference last year, and maybe if I come back here next year or something, I can do this for you guys. Antarctica is a very deep and interesting subject. and it's very hush-hush, and I've even done a coast-to-coast George Norrie Shore about it, but you have to be very careful about it. In the process of getting the images for that slideshow, in January of that year, I'd had all my computers checked for, viruses. Between January and April, when I put that show together, finding those images, I got 550 viruses on my computer and almost lost all my data. So I would really caution you to not go looking, because they've set it up so that your computer will become infected. If I can get it together I've got another 20 or 30 programs. If I can get it together in this next year to make enough money to afford to create videos for you guys on Antarctica, I will. But it always costs me several $1,000s to hire a crew and do all of that stuff. But it is important to know about because it's so secret. But you have to be careful, because if you're too vocal about things like this, it's an active investigation. It's not very safe. So basically, I'm sure because of the consciousness of the people in the inner earth, that they basically said to the Nazis, if you're going to come in here, you're laying down all your weapons, and you're going to abide by our rules, or you're out. And so that's what happened. But unfortunately, as we know, Henry Kissinger brought 10,000 Nazis into this country under Operation Paperclip. And they began really infiltrating many of our systems. So including, the time travel experiments, Philadelphia experiment, Montauk projects, space program, Wernher von Braun. He seemed like he was an okay guy. But definitely mind control and a bunch of other stuff. So since World War II, since Henry Kissinger did us that non-favor, we definitely we've had a dark cloud going on. And there's a lot more I can say about this, because I've been, my boyfriend for some years was actually one of the two men that jumped off the ship, the USS Eldridge, in the Philadelphia experiment. And so, they were trying, when they got over here, to go back in time with the Montauk Project and make it so that they would win World War II. But they found that they could not do that this was the prime timeline, and they could not really change the prime timeline. They could create alternative timelines. And if they created enough negative alternative timelines, they could overshadow this timeline to permit the darkness to enter into our field, which is what's happened, okay? So, of course, everyone's going to assume they're in the prime timeline, aren't they? Every one of us is whatever. If we're in parallel realities, we're all going to assume we're in the prime. But in the prime, the Allies did win. So this is why, when the neo-Nazis started supporting Trump and things like that, it's very dangerous, because they have been operating behind the scenes. And, for my money, I don't know where you guys are with this, but I'm really not for a sexist, racist, narcissistic, compulsive liar. So, okay, in modern times, we have Ed Walters. Did any of you know him? I actually knew him because I'm in Georgia and he was in Florida. He was an architect who had no clue about UFOs. One day at dusk, he looked out his window and he saw this UFO. He went out with a Polaroid camera, began taking pictures, and ran back in to get more film, came back out, couldn't see the UFO, and was suddenly lifted in the air by the UFO. And suddenly they dropped him because his wife drove in with the groceries into the driveway. Thank goodness for the wife. And then they, gathered up the Polaroids and pulled them back, and lo and behold, there were all these UFOs. And he went through about 3 years where they were just tracking him and trying to get him. And these were the Greys, for sure. And of course, it ruined his traditional architectural business, as you can imagine. MUFON went down and spent time with him and posted lookouts and so forth. So, very interesting case. He literally shot this from through the windshield of his car as they were coming down to try to abduct him. Bless his little heart. Okay, so we know that ships are often seen over military bases, nuclear atomic facilities, missile sites, active volcanoes, sacred sites, pyramids, and other human gatherings. Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. That's because they know that we're going to have a pole shift. the poles are melting. We're not idiots. We can figure this out, okay? So when the poles melt, really, although we may have lived through this 12,000 years ago, we don't remember. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But because we now have hundreds of nuclear facilities all over the world, what has happened in Fukushima with the meltdown of that one reactor could happen all over the world, making this planet completely uninhabitable. So of course they're monitoring this, because if the poles start to shift, maybe they can beam all this stuff up or disintegrate it, okay? But it's the only way our planet is going to survive the insanity of the society that we have created, with something so radioactive. So of course, they're monitoring our military-industrial complex and our atomic facilities, because it's the only prayer we have to not ruin our planet and blow ourselves up. Really, those are on our side. Now, in current time, the UFO movement sort of began with this sighting you may not have heard of. It was a ship over Los Angeles, and there were dozens of pictures taken. It was called the Battle of Los Angeles and this is not the ship sending out rays. These are spotlights from the Earth in Los Angeles trying to figure out what the heck this darn thing is, okay? Of course, we all know about the Roswell, New Mexico, and the Sirocco, and you heard Linda talk about the 1941 incident yesterday, the Roswell crash, 1947. Now, in recent years, I say recent, the last 20 years when we were actually on friendly terms with Russia for a while, we had declassified KGB files, and you can see they have a landed disc here, like, what do we do with it? I don't know. What do you think we should do with it? Put it on the truck. Let's take it back to base. We have in 1953 when Eisenhower was actually thinking he would let this out. Truman set up the MJ-12, the Majestic 12. That was 6 scientists and 6 military people. That was in 1947. But and of course he kept it secret because we just come out of World War II where we were facing Hitler. And so the only way the atomic bomb was developed was secrecy. So, we can understand how and why he did it, not to alarm the public. We had just gone through a huge trauma. We were just rebuilding our societies as a world. When Eisenhower got in power, he decided, he was going to let this out and tell everybody. But he convened a conclave of 50 people. And they were like teachers, scientists, professors, people, smart people, some average day people. I've read one of the letters from one of these people, and he wrote his wife, and he said, "We thought we were the most advanced society on the only inhabited planet. We were God's gift. Yes, that's who we are. And we've discovered we're kind of like on a backwash planet. We're, kind of primitive next to some of these races. And, it makes me wonder what the meaning of life is. And, of course, this is true when a highly technological society comes in contact with a more primitive society. We can see it when we have had contact with tribal cultures. The tribal culture value system falls apart because they feel, less than. Okay, so John D. Rockefeller said to Eisenhower, "Hey, bud, this is what's going to happen, if you let it out now." So Eisenhower said, "Well, what do you think I should do?" And Rockefeller said, "Well, why don't we, try to get all the technology we can. We'll put it into back engineering. We'll try to grow ourselves up. We'll have official denial, but then we'll also try to catch up. So by the time this comes out, we won't feel like we're second graders. We'll feel like we're at least in high school, even if they're, in college, okay?" So that made sense. So this is why it was hidden in the 1950s. And again, I don't really blame these people because I think some of them were really trying to be good stewards. But then what happened as it became more and more separated and silent from the actual real leadership, you had black budget funds doing all sorts of things. You have all the stories from the X-Files with the cancer man, with his cigarette, going and silencing this person and threatening this person. person and, wiping out this person's bank account. And it got sinister, and it became dark. And then you have Kissinger bringing in all these Nazis, and they were like, oh, our opportunity for power and control. So not such a good story. We also have had recent, meaning in the last 10 years, flybys over the Capitol, because at one point it looked like, we thought Carter might release it. He released a lot of Freedom of Information documents. We thought, Obama would release it. But let's face it, he inherited a huge mess and from, George Bush Jr. that almost, very likable, but almost bankrupted this country, as he's bankrupted 5 other businesses, but very likable. I like his accent, So here we have Japan. This is a Japanese crew, 1986, jumbo freighter, witnessed 3 unidentified objects were flying over Alaska. The sighting gained international attention with the Federal Aviation Administration, announced it was officially going to investigate it because the Traffic Control Center in Anchorage, Alaska had reported the UFO detected on radar. Here we have, of course, a subject Linda Moulton Howe is probably the queen of and has done immense research on, is the cattle mutilations. And we all have a great respect for her and her research. But all through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, these were happening. These are actual pictures. These poor little cows are out in the field, and behind them, here's a UFO coming. Uh-oh. So here is one literally being pulled up in the air. Here's another one literally being lifted in the air while the rest of them, naively graze away, not realizing they could be next. So poor things. Triangular ships seen around the world. This is from Belgium. And there were huge flyovers because Belgium is the capital of NATO, okay, in the 1990s. And these were tracked by over 13,000 people who saw them, photographed them, videotaped them, and so forth. Triangular ships over Brussels. The wave of sightings began in March 30th of 1990 when a police captain observed a giant triangular-shaped object. F-16 fighters would attempt to chase the UFO, but were easily outmaneuvered. A NATO-operated base near Glans, just southeast of Brussels, would also report the UFO on their radar systems. During this time, ground witnesses broadly corroborated the information obtained by radar, describing a small rectangular UFO that completely disappeared from sight at one point, while a larger triangle moved very rapidly upwards as the F-16s flew past. So, we can see some of these different kinds of ships. How many of you know about Billy Meyer? Billy Meyer was a one-armed Swiss farmer in Switzerland that from 1975 on, for about 25 years, had ongoing contact with totally human-looking Pleiadians, very benevolent. They say they are our closest, genetic ancestors. And he took hundreds of photographs with a cheap little camera that he couldn't even focus. He only had one arm, for heaven's sakes. He could lift one hand and click the button. That's the best he could do. But there were 13 governments literally getting copies of his negative strips, paying the photo lab, because they were all following this so closely. And he also took some video. This is actually a picture of 2 of the Pleiadians. I know it's fuzzy, but they look like babes to me. Gorgeous women. I think they live about 350 years or more, but they say that we're their closest genetic ancestors and that they've been involved with our planet, and they're very benevolent and very good. And now, this is Billy Meyer's beam ship from the 1970s. This is a picture taken in Germany in 2009 that appears to be the same outline of the same kind of ship. Okay. Now, this is another guy he's a retired military officer from North Carolina. He actually sits in a wheelchair, okay? And he took an amazing series of photographs of a Pleiadian ship, and it was a very large ship that was an interdimensional ship. In other words, it wasn't just a little scout cruiser. It was like the big boy that could go between their system and ours. And, the way they talk about traveling 400 light years is they say that they fold space. So let's just imagine that this is the Pleiades here, and here's our solar system. So instead of trying to go in a line like we would, they take 3.5 hours to go outside their solar system. They then move up into the 4th or 5th dimension. They fold time-space. They appear outside of our solar system, and they take 3.5 hours to come inside of our solar system, so it takes them 7 hours to come here. Now, you cannot understand this technology unless you can imagine multidimensional reality. And this is a very important thing in the UFO field. I think for a long time, because we were so ridiculed, that a lot of us stuck to, the metallurgical samples and the schematics, and could I have the engineering diagrams, okay? How can I prove it in the 3rd dimension? And that's very important. It has great value, but it's not the whole picture. Over 30 years ago, my friend Colonel Don Ware, who was a MUFON director for many years in the Southeast, he met with these government officials, and they said that 78 to 80% of the UFO phenomena is multidimensional, and you cannot even understand it unless you can get on that page, which is one of the reasons why I bothered to tell you about my own experiences at the beginning. Because, even physicists like Michio Kaku talk about the fact that there are at least 10 different dimensions. So, we ourselves have to conceive of a larger universe. And some of the beings that, Linda and some of the other speakers have spoken about may be very 3rd dimensional, not such conscious people. But believe me, there are very conscious races out there that are highly evolved in the 3rd and the 4th and in the 5th dimension that love this planet, love humanity with all of our warts and everything. And they really want to see us evolve and not devolve. They want to see us become free from these system lords, so to speak. So anyway, these are pictures that he took of the same exact ship as it changed. And this is another one. Very interesting, over a period of several hours. Now, the government, of course, as we know, publicly denies that these things exist. But on the other hand, they've been trying to prepare us through television shows and through medias. So I'm going to show you a series of a few very fun ads that they have planted through the years, especially in the 90s when they were really looking at disclosure. This one's fun, isn't it? They're coming. Okay. Greetings, Earthlings. This is Chevrolet. These are the Fortune 100 companies that were given permission to begin to bring this information out. Here is Crown Royal. Mission accomplished. I came to Earth for your booze. This is a billboard in Atlanta, 24-hour emergency response. So if you're visiting from another planet and you happen to get caught in the wires, call us. We'll get you out. Pretty funny. This is Cheap Pants. They got little gray aliens wearing blue jeans down here, okay? The most comfortable pants in the galaxy for those long trips. And here we have one with some kind of a technology. When you're out on the leading edge of technology, where do you go for parts? Call us. Here's Kodak, when Kodak was around. Aliens in my backyard. I'm not kidding. They came out with like some kind of photo game. Unbelievable. And here, because you never know who's listening in, Yamaha. Here's Absolute Vodka. Yep, it's back to alcohol. I'm surprised they don't have reefers, really. And here we have copier and liquor ads. I mean, what the heck is this strange little dude doing in a copier ad? This was how they were trying to prepare the public in the 1990s. And of course, who can forget the famous Amoco oil ad? How many of you actually saw this ad? This was analyzed by those of us in the UFO field for many, many years, and it's believed that this is actually a real alien. The liquid in the eye, the texture along the head, the strange sort of imprint here, the respiratory, the pattern of the skin itself. So that's a pretty interesting idea that this could actually be a real little guy. And of course, they were coming out in the 1990s with all sorts of things that tried to help bring it to the public. The Roswell files, I spoke, as well as I think Linda, at the 50th anniversary of Roswell. Here's, Will Smith with Out There from Independence Day. Carl Sagan, who of course died of cancer, because all scientists at their heart are about the pursuit of truth, and Carl Sagan got access to all this, but he had to lie to the public. So of course he got cancer, because he wasn't being true to his true spirit. So here he's saying, you know, are they coming for us? A distinguished scientist takes a hard look at reports of ETs, abductions, and so forth. So it looked like it might come out. Also, Lawrence Rockefeller, who seemed to have been an enlightened Rockefeller for a change, actually had When Cosmic Cultures Meet. And there were very important people in this, where he brought together spirituality and physics and UFO researchers. You may or may not know about this stuff, but I've been speaking for 20 years, as you know, some of my colleagues have. And so I do know. This was Bill Baldwin, who literally worked with angels and exorcised demons. He was from Florida, an amazing man. This was Richard Boylan, a psychologist. James Deardoff, PhD. This is Michael Hesseman, who had a magazine in Germany. He was really a leading mover and shaker in Europe. This is J.J. Hurtak, a friend of mine, Jim Hurtak, The Keys of Enoch. Here's Jaime Maussan, who's like the, you know, Dan Rather of Mexico. He's an amazing researcher. All the people in the Spanish and Mexican, South American world send him all sorts of cool cases. If you ever get a chance to hear Jaime speak, he's excellent. Ruth Montgomery, you remember Aliens Among Us, you know? There was all sorts of, I can't remember all the names of her things, but she was dealing with spirits and multi-dimensions. Here we have Zecharia Sitchin, the late great Zecharia Sitchin, a wonderful Sumerian scholar who brought us. Here's Leo Sprinkle, a psychologist who does ET abduction, hypnosis. Charles Tart from Dolphin Research from Stanford University. You know, Don Ware. This is my friend Colonel Don Ware. So, you know, there really was an effort made that it looked like we might have the breakthrough in the 90s, but of course we know it didn't happen. All right, moving on. So, Dr. Michael Wolff, you guys may not know about him. He looks like a really wonderful guy here, but he was deeply involved in this research for many years. He was a member of the satellite government for over 25 years. He had an MD in neurology, a PhD in theoretical physics, a BS in biogenetics, and a JD, I don't even know what that one is, in international law, and a Doctor of Science in computer sciences. Very smart guy. He attained a very high above top secret clearance level and worked primarily on joint ET and human scientific projects. During his final years, he spoke with various journalists about the UFO ET cover-up. His bosses at the National Security Council gave him permission to generate a control leak of secret information in a fictional book called The Catchers of Heaven, which I tried to buy a few years ago. It was like $250. It's really hard to get. He worked in laboratories at Area 51 and S4 at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. For 5 years, he says, I met with extraterrestrial beings every day in my work and shared living quarters with them. He served as a scientific consultant for the American president, the NSC, National Security Council, and ET-related matters, was a member of the Majestic 12 Special Studies Group, appointed head of the leading agency where he specialized in gathering information on different ET races, and he died on September 18th of 2000, from cancer. Cancer after a long period of ill health. Now, certainly he could have gotten it from radiation poisoning from the ships. That's possible. But I think many of these scientists really, they mean well, and then they get stuck in a system where they can't reveal what they know. Here's Hartford, Connecticut. This is a close-up of this one. Here we have Portsmouth, UK, 2008. Here's Utah, 2010. Here's over John Lennon's Peace Tower, a long cylindrical one. Here's Washington, D.C., and these various flaps, including 1995, 1999, 2005. And July 4th of 2002, we hear a former officer of the U.S. Capitol Police leaked reports of UFOs and hyperdimensional ET spacecraft flyovers over the U.S. Capitol using email. The leaked reports confirm specific UFO ET flyovers on April 22nd, 1999, and in the spring of 1995 in P-51 restricted airspace over the U.S. Capitol. Of course, how many of you remember this one? The UFO that was photographed by 4 different video cameras over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And they were all synchronized. This is the UFO, and it literally goes just like this, like in 1 second it moves up. This is not, I don't think that this is the UFO. Okay, it's just this. Okay, very interesting. That was 2011. So, this is Annapolis, Maryland, okay, military college, okay. So there it is, 2010. These are close-ups, look like little shuttlecocks from badminton, don't they? This is Rio de Janeiro. Here's the Statue of Christ, and here's the lightship. This is China. China, they actually shut down the airport because of these triangular crafts. And there's been a lot of activity in China. We don't hear about most of it. This was 2010. Here's at the Baitu Chinese airport in 2010, another one. And there's been all sorts of strange little blimp-like things. Jaime Maussan actually shows amazing video of this with hundreds of them moving in synchronization as if they're controlled by one ship and they all move together. And this is over America. Here's Britain and Holland again. This is from a satellite where we look down over suburbia and we see a UFO. Now these get really strange. This is from Russia. This looks like, to me, a classic thing of this UFO shrouding itself in clouds. We have this strange thing, looks like a Stargate opening. It doesn't appear to be coming from, the Earth. There's no light going up there. It appears to be coming from some other place. This one's really interesting. Talk about, you can't hide. You might think you're hidden. You got those clouds over you, but I think we've noticed something's out of order. Pretty amazing. And look again at the size of this ship, and what the heck is this strange thing, Look at this one. Strange tubular cloud roll caught on film. We can see the scale of it here. I've never seen something like this. Have you? A real one? Very interesting. Now, this is from a naval cruiser, a U.S. military cruiser, and here's the UFO, and there's all this crackling of light energy around it. These get really interesting. This was filmed in Colombia in 2010, and it looks like some kind of a pyramid with some other kind of smaller ship beside it. Michael Cohen writes, an alien race that traverses the vast distances of space, in all likelihood at faster than light speeds and using stargates in a giant pyramid or diamond-shaped UFO, seems to be in the process of trying to make contact with humanity. And here we have similar ships over nuclear power sites in Japan. Look at this. Electrical systems. And again, very unusual ships. This one looks a little more even. This is clearly much taller on the high end of the pyramid. And here we have in Taiwan. So you can see, and again, this one has the same little blip here. So, I have no idea if this is a satellite or this is a controller. We just don't really know what this technology is. Here's a mothership with 5 smaller ships, 2009. This is Casa Grande, Arizona. And again, here's a close-up of the energy signatures of whatever the radiation fuel energy system is, creating a red plasma corona. This is New Mexico. It's a light ship, and I've seen one of these in a video where it began to move and change shape, almost like an organic organism with these strange little claws. Very strange. And then, of course, there's these light ships. These seem to be with higher dimensional beings that can put their hands down and use their ability to drop their brainwaves into theta and delta. We're beta, alpha, theta, delta. When I do my readings, I drop my brainwaves into theta and delta. That's how I'm able to access information about people, their soul records. But we can't fly these ships because we're staying up here in little busy beta. We have to be able to drop our brainwaves down into these deeper meditative states in order to be able to even interface with these ships. This is another one of those glowing ships shot in the United Kingdom. Here's in Utah. It appears to be another one. It's kind of a different kind of ship. Now, this was actually shot by a friend of mine who was a waiter in a restaurant that I eat at in Atlanta. One morning I went for breakfast, and he came over and said, Tricia, I have to show you this. I was at my aunt's house in Decatur, Georgia. Does anybody know where Decatur, Georgia is? And he said, we heard a noise, like a whirling noise, and I went outside, and this is what I saw over the house. And there's hieroglyphics here on the edge. Now, what's interesting is just about 2 or 3 days later, I think the same ship was photographed in North Carolina. And then about 2 months later, I got a call from a mother that had a 14-year-old son, and they lived out in the country in Kentucky, and they were going to move in, but her son was being visited by UFOs, and he took these pictures. It looks like the same ship with the hieroglyphs on the edge, and here's the night ship, and it looks like an exhaust or something, some energy signature coming down here. And of course, I, kind of reassured her, what it really was, because I was able to see that clairvoyantly. But now, how many of you know about the Carlos Diaz case? This is a very famous case that Jaime Maussan brought to us. These are higher consciousness beings who are very concerned about what we are doing to our planet. They're very benevolent. They're totally human. They can interface with humanity. He's in... This is the case, the most spectacular UFO case in the 21st century, with 23 original UFO films, most of which have never been published. In 1981, on a lonely road in the mountains of Mexico, Carlos Diaz had an encounter with UFOs that changed his life forever. 20 years later, the contacts continued. 12,000 eyewitnesses, including journalists, scientists, and the mayor of Mexico City, have now encountered this phenomena. And this, of course, is the ship, and he's been up on these ships, and he has a video camera, in his kitchen pointed at his yard the whole time. And, he's a lovely, lovely person, high consciousness, humble, and the beings he's making contact with are high consciousness, kind and humble, and very concerned about, our nuclear, our atomic, our war, the plastics we're putting into the ocean. Did you know that the plastics we're putting into the ocean are acidifying the ocean and killing the coral reefs? And they're creating the red algae. Okay, actually my friend Vale, my assistant who's working at the booth with me downstairs, told me this. I did not know that. So this is why plastic, as it deteriorates, acidifies, and it's very toxic. And we kill the oceans, that's it. We're done, boys and girls. That and the bees. Okay, so we really have to become conscious. We have to recycle, and we have to vote for people who care about the environment. People who are not about self-greed and self-service. Very important. So let's take a look at this. I'm coming to the end of this. I'm going as fast as I can, as you guys can tell. This is a picture of the sun, but it's been covered up so we can see the coronal ejections from the sun. This is from NASA, it's August 29th of 1997 at 4:02. And what we're looking at are gigantic cylindrical ships and other ships. Now, if you have ever seen, you remember when Venus did that cross between us and the sun? Venus looked like the size of a pea, and the sun looked the size of a basketball, okay? That's a planet, and we're a little bigger than Venus. If we can see these things, imagine how big they are. So a lot of these are the galactic fleet that are really trying to protect us. And I know you hear a lot about, the reptilians are getting us, the grays are getting us, oh my God, it's, let's just kill ourselves and get it over with. But we really have to realize that we have allies. We have allies in a lot of these nations, and they're trying not to interfere except when we're in trouble. And because of the solar mass ejections coming from our sun, they have been afraid that these waves would actually knock out our grid systems and set us back to the mid-1800s when we had no electricity, let alone computers, air conditioning, or any of the things that we run our lives on. Banking systems, imagine if it all went down. There are physicists and scientists who have talked about this on YouTube. So what the Galactic Council has done is they have put these buoys around the sun in order to try to mitigate the waves coming off the sun to protect us, to buy us time. Now what are we doing with the time? Not much, are we? I mean, we're really not taking care of the nuclear reactors. We're not doing very much. We're just kind of, surviving. We're watching Trump TV, holding our breath for the shoe to drop. So here we are again with the probes buffering for the EMPs from the sun. So we really do have allies, and I think it's really important for us to realize that so we don't, just slit our wrist and end it all. So, okay, so let's just take a very quick look at some fun, strange archaeology. This is my last kind of run of about 15 slides, 20 slides. Can you guys handle it? Are you having fun? Okay. Okay, so there are many different kinds of ETs visiting the world, our world, because there's many of them out there. Most of them are humid in appearance, but certainly we know that there's the insectoids, there's the reptoids, there's the weird little gray aliens, okay? But some of them are coming in from the third dimension, but some are also coming in from the fourth and fifth dimension. And this, if you've ever followed Corey Good's work or some of those discoveries, they're talking about some of these higher dimensional beings coming in to try to really help us. Now, these are some of the remains that we are finding that we should be hearing about on the nightly news, in my opinion, that have been covered up. Archaeologists are now finding the remains of 20 and 21 feet beings in Turkey, Scotland, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and India, to name a few. Pretty great, huh? Here we see the size of the head. I mean, this is just amazing, the scale and the size, these giants. I have a whole presentation on giants and fairies. No, I haven't made it into a DVD yet, I'm sorry, but maybe next year. So there are many different kinds of human beings. From the teeny ones, some of my last slides I'm going to show you are real fairies that are this big. Real fairies, yes, I believe in fairies because they are real. And I'm going to show you beings that are this big, okay? And we know about the hobbits. Remember, they found the hobbits on that island that are like this big? We look like big boys to them. So some of these other guys look very big to us. This is a 15-footer. This was the size of Osiris, okay? This is us, 15 feet. If I'm 5'4", add 2 more of me to get to his height, okay? So, and then we've even got the 30-foot tall ones, which are the Titans. And you remember the Anunnaki went to war with the Titans at one point. And fortunately they won, or we'd have these big boys ruling the planet. So look at this one. This is obviously a skeleton of one of these giant beings and a cowboy protecting his find. He's mine, I tell you, mine. Look at this one. This is a femur bone. In 1856, a skeleton of a 10-foot and 9-foot human was found in West Virginia. Now, this is taller than 8 or 9 feet. This is just an image I wanted to show you of one that was found. Local law took the skeleton and said it was a hoax because 3 bullets had been found in its skull. What this has to do with the rest of the huge skeleton is anyone's guess. The Smithsonian Institute, which, I love going to that museum, but they have been complicit in covering this stuff up for the last 150 years. Anytime they hear about something that does not go along with the traditional timeline, they go to try to confiscate it. So in comparison, here we have kind of what they would be like and what we would be like. This is a femur bone put into a being in order to give you a sense of his size. Okay, that guy would probably be 14 to 16 feet tall and have 20 to 22 inch long feet. Okay, now here's Bubba, who's going, I just do not know whose skull this is. I do not know what to think about this. This is just too weird to me, okay? And I agree with him. It's pretty darn weird. So here we have a sense of their skulls and our skulls and size. And we know from Chase's wonderful presentation that in the Mayan, the Incan, we have these huge craniums that have 3,300 grams to them. And over in Egypt, we have the same kind of thing. Our brain has 1,350 grams. Okay, dolphins have 1,650 grams. Gorillas have 800 grams. It takes 1,000 grams to master a spoken language. So if you can imagine, if they could really use all those grams, they're probably telepathic. They can probably send, dreams to you. They might be able to shapeshift. I mean, we don't know. But certainly they have more brain power than we do. But we have to remember we're only using 7 to 10% of our brains on a good day. And if evolution is the only thing that's true, how the heck did we get it? Because evolution says if we don't use it, it atrophies, and we only got it because we needed it. So how did we get that other 90%? So this is why it's important, in my opinion, for all of us to learn to, access more of who we are, the divine nature of who we are, so we can access more of our own potential. You've heard enough about these. I'm not even going to bother to go into them. This one's fun. This was found in Brazil in a mummified body. This is kind of like the Predator dudes, the Alien movie. Did you see that? Okay. This specimen's on display at the museum on Sundays and under guard. According to the owners, at least 10 efforts have been made to steal the item. Yeah, I bet. Right. The powers that be don't really want that out there, do they? Horned giants. We have all these stories of the devil. Oh, these poor aliens, they come down here and it's like, oh, it's a devil because you have horns. So this is July 1973 issue in the magazine Pursuit reported that in the 1880s, while digging in a mound in Bradford County, Pennsylvania, professors of the American Investigating Museum found the bones of 68 men in an Indian mound, believed buried about 1,200. Their average height was around 7 feet, although some were much taller, and they had protuberances or horns on their heads. A story about the horned skull appeared in the Reader's Digest, Mysteries of the Unexplained, and here we are. So there's just, there's a lot of versions. There's the webbed hands, the three-toed, the 4, the 5, the 6. I mean, we got a lot of variation here. Of course, they turned it over to the state historian and professors and the investigating museum, and of course, it was lost. It was conveniently misplaced, yes. So the Anunnaki gods are a big subject, and I have DVDs. Yes, I have DVDs on them, and I have DVDs on some of the giants, too. So I do have some here, a few for you guys. But, I think what's happening is we're having to take a new look at history and say, maybe the gods were not all mythology. Maybe our ancestors weren't just crazy pagans. Maybe they actually knew something that we've forgotten. And, if you have a 15-footer and a UFO come down and say, mow the yard, you'll probably do it, right? Because it's pretty intimidating. So we're having to take another look at our history, thanks to people like Zecharia Sitchin, who went on to, be able to read Sumerian cuneiform text, one of 10,000 people in the world, and create those amazing books that give us a new view. I want to take a look at some evidence of the size of these people. This is us, the humans. These are women with bosoms. Yes, indeed. They're grown. They're not children. These are the gods. So you get a sense of proportion. Same thing. This is looks like a husband and a wife with a child and a pig. This is us. This is them. So they'd probably be, 9-footers maybe here, you think? Here we are again, human woman. These are the goddesses and the gods. This is probably a demigod, okay? Half human, half Anunnaki. He's in between. Same kind of thing here. This is Persephone and Demeter giving a blessing to this full-grown warrior. And here we have one of the gods with a demigod. That would be half human, half Anunnaki, who would have been a high priest or a king. This is who they chose, to kind of help with the people, get the knowledge out to the people. This is a find that goes back 6,500 BC. Look at the size of this guy, big cranium, by the way, next to the human archaeologist. We all know Michael Tellinger and Goliath's footprint. This is a 4-foot-long footprint found in South Africa, close to the Swaziland border, estimated to be between 200 million and 3 million years old. Here we have an even bigger footprint in, I think it's Java is where this is, or Thailand, one of the two. And, it's like, holy moly, this guy was big, okay? And it's colossal, and they call it Lord Hanuman's footprint and so forth. It wasn't Hanuman's footprint, but still, it's a good name for it. And here we have this one, another Titan. 30 feet tall. These are just some of many, many, many images that I have collected of giants and what's going on in archaeology. Now, these are their axes, so they were obviously pretty big boys. And so clearly we have a far more complex past than traditional history would have us believe. In fact, in Warsaw, I've spoken in many countries in Europe, and in Warsaw there was an exhibit of early Christians with a gigantic winged angel from southern Egypt behind him. And you get a sense again of the height. If he's, let's say, 6 feet tall, this guy would be maybe 11 feet, maybe 10 or 11 feet tall. Now, I have no idea if this is real or not, could be faked. Freaky news could be a misinformation outlet, you know, but I found it very interesting, and I have heard that they found the body of satyrs, you know, of human, and but then they were like, oh, it must be a goat and a human that were buried together. Now, this is, you know, I'm just going to show you a few of these. These are dead aliens, clearly, different kinds. This was found in Siberia, in the Irkutsk region of Siberia. I don't think I said that right, in an area where there have been hundreds of reports of UFOs. And this little dude obviously got out of the ship, got left behind, froze to death, and, you know, that was all she wrote. This little guy, look how small he is. This is a hand, okay? So there are small, medium, and large. Now, this is very interesting, and I have not gone to see this myself, but this appeared in a Tucson International Wildlife Museum in 2012. This is a centaur. Definitely there were centaurs. Definitely there were satyrs and fawns, you know, because there was genetic experiments going on at the time of Atlantis, and a few of those actually survived into Greek times, where we hear about them. Now, you may not know about this. Again, I'm just going to show you a few images as we're getting towards the very end of this. This is called the Maryland collection, and this was a British collector whose father was a biologist, and he became fascinated with what we think of now as the paranormal, and he began to collect these specimens from all over the world, and they are real, and they were found. He lived in 1785 in London, son of a biologist, little horned dudes. These are small guys, the little, you know, 4 wings, moth kind of wings. This is a coin to give you a sense of the size. Oh, I don't have any more of those, sorry. Anyway, they found them in his basement of his townhome, brick townhome in London. They had been boxed up in crates for, you know, 250 years. So, you know, this stuff is starting to come out, and I will just show you the last couple of pictures of the fairies. There's a professor at I think, Cambridge. No, it's the University of Manchester, who is actually, he thought he was photographing insects. And when he got it home and blew it up, they're fairies. And so, you know, all the legends of the mythology, is it possible that all of them are true? It's possible, and I think we have to keep an open mind. So I think we have to remember we live in a large universe, that we're entering a time of expanding our knowledge base, expanding our idea of reality and what is actually true. And to realize that we are one, a beautiful planet, an incredible planet, a paradise planet that we seem to be ruining, but a paradise planet that is one among trillions of planets and billions of stars and billions of galaxies. We should be honored to live on this planet, and we should treasure it as the living presence that it is. I mean, life cannot come from something dead. And we all live off of the substance of the planet Earth, off of her food, off of her waters. So of course she's living. I think we have to stay open and not like just be freaked out. I think we should be more freaked out by our military-industrial complex, the AI robots, and the insanity of the dark forces of humankind. The Galactic Council wants to invite us in. They want more than anything to include us because they realize how beautiful human beings can be, how conscious and how rich with emotion and creativity. But we are a dangerous, aggressive, crazy species. Let us face it. You know, we have self-sabotage programs up the wazoo. And of course, we inherited them from our parents and our parents' parents and from the church and from a million other, misaligned things that maybe started off the right way, but someplace along the way got a little off track. And now 1,500, 2,000 years later, we're off track. So we have to have a course correction. And through these more benevolent species, to realize that we could actually grow into our own divine potential. That's really what they want for us. And to learn to create societies with greater wisdom and greater peace. So that concludes my presentation, and it's 6:05.